Chapter 2. Bedouin Civilization, Savage Nations and Tribes and Their Conditions of Life, including several basic and explanatory statements. 1. Both Bedouins and sedentary people are natural groups. It too should be known that differences of condition among people are the result of the different ways in which they make their living. Social organization enables them to cooperate toward that end and to start with the simple necessities of life, before they get to conveniences and luxuries. 3. Some people adopt agriculture, the cultivation of vegetables and grains, as their way of making a living. Others adopt animal husbandry, the use of sheep, cattle, goats, bees, and silkworms, for breeding and for their products. Those who live by agriculture or animal husbandry cannot avoid the call of the desert, because it alone offers the wide fields, acres, pastures for animals, and other things that the settled areas do not offer, for it is therefore necessary for them to restrict themselves to the desert. Their social organization and cooperation for the needs of life and civilization, such as food, shelter, and warmth, do not take them beyond the bare subsistence level, because of their inability to provide for anything beyond those things. Subsequent improvement of their conditions and acquisition of more wealth and comfort than they need, cause them to rest and take it easy. Then, they cooperate for things beyond the bare necessities. They use more food and clothes, and take pride in them. They build large houses, and lay out towns and cities for protection. This is followed by an increase in comfort and ease, which leads to formation of the most developed luxury customs. They take the greatest pride in the preparation of food and a fine cuisine, in the use of varied splendid clothes of silk and brocade and other fine materials, in the construction of ever higher buildings and towers, in elaborate furnishings for the buildings, and the most intensive cultivation of crafts in actuality. They build castles and mansions, provide them with running water. 5. Build their towers higher and higher, and compete in furnishing them most elaborately. They differ in the quality of the clothes, the beds, the vessels, and the utensils they employ for their purposes. Here, now, we have sedentary people. Sedentary people means the inhabitants of cities and countries, some of whom adopt the crafts as their way of making a living, while others adopt commerce. They earn more and live more comfortably than Bedouins, because they live on a level beyond the level of bare necessity, and their way of making a living corresponds to their wealth. It has thus become clear that Bedouins and sedentary people are natural groups which exist by necessity, as we have stated. 2. The Arab Sikhs are a natural group in the world. We have mentioned in the previous section that the inhabitants of the desert adopt the natural manner of making a living, namely, agriculture and animal husbandry. They restrict themselves to the necessary in food, clothing, and mode of dwelling, and to the other necessary conditions and customs. They do not possess conveniences and luxuries beyond these bare necessities. They use tents of hair and wool, or houses of wood, or of clay and stone, which are not furnished elaborately. The purpose is to have shade and shelter, and nothing beyond that. They also take shelter in caverns and caves. The food they take is either little prepared or not prepared at all, save that it may have been touched by fire. 7. For those who make their living through the cultivation of grain and through agriculture, it is better to be stationary than to travel around. Such, therefore, are the inhabitants of small communities, villages, and mountain regions. These people make up the large mass of the Berbers and non-Arabs. Those who make their living from animals requiring pasturage, such as sheep and cattle, usually travel around in order to find pasture and water for their animals, since it is better for them to move around in the land. They are called sheepmi, shawiyah, that is, men who live on sheep and cattle. They do not go deep into the desert, because they would not find good pastures there. Such people include the Berbers, the Turks and their relatives, the Turkomans and the Slavs, 8 for instance. Those who make their living by raising camels move around more. They wander deeper into the desert, because the hilly 9 pastures with their plants and shrubs do not furnish enough subsistence for camels. They must feed on the desert shrubs and drink the salty desert water. They must move around the desert regions during the winter, in flight from the harmful cold to the warm desert air. In the desert sands, camels can find places to give birth to their young ones. Of all animals, camels have the hardest delivery and the greatest need for warmth in connection with it. 10. Camel nomads are therefore forced to make excursions deep into the desert. Frequently, too, they are driven from the hills by the militia, and they penetrate farther into the desert, because they do not want the militia 11 to mete out justice to them or to punish them for their hostile acts. As a result, they are the most savage human beings that exist. Compared with sedentary people, they are on a level with wild, untamable animals, and dumb beasts of prey. Such people are the Arabs. In the West, the nomadic Berbers and the Zata are their counterparts, and in the East, the Kurds, the Turkomans, and the Turks. The Arabs, however, make deeper excursions into the desert and are more rooted in desert life than the other groups, because they live exclusively on camels, while the other groups live on sheep and cattle, as well as camels. It has thus become clear that the Arabs are a natural group which by necessity exists in civilization. God is the Creator, the Knowing One. 12. 3. Bedouins are prior to sedentary people. The desert is the basis and reservoir of civilization and cities. We 13 have mentioned that the Bedouins restrict themselves to the bare necessities in their conditions of life, and are unable to go beyond them, while sedentary people concern themselves with conveniences and luxuries in their conditions and customs. The bare necessities are no doubt prior to the conveniences and luxuries. Bare necessities, in a way, are basic, and luxuries secondary and an outgrowth of the necessities. Bedouins, thus, are the basis of, and prior to, cities and sedentary people. Man seeks first the bare necessities. Only after he has obtained the bare necessities does he get to comforts and luxuries. The toughness of desert life precedes the softness of sedentary life. Therefore, urbanizatio is found to be the goal of the Bedouin. He aspires to that goal. 14. Through his own efforts, he achieves what he proposes to achieve in this respect. When he has obtained enough to be ready for the conditions and customs of luxury, he enters upon a life of ease and submits himself to the yoke of the city. This is the case with all Bedouin tribes. Sedentary people, on the other hand, have no desire for desert conditions, unless they are motivated by some urgent necessity. 15. Or they cannot keep up with their fellow city dwellers. Evidence for the fact that Bedouins are the basis of, and prior to, sedentary people is furnished by investigating the inhabitants of any given city. We shall find that most of its inhabitants originated among Bedouins dwelling in the country and villages of the vicinity. Such Bedouins became wealthy, settled in the city, and adopted a life of ease and luxury, such as exists in the sedentary environment. This proves that sedentary conditions are secondary to desert conditions and that they are the basis of them. 15. This should be understood. All Bedouins and sedentary people differ also among themselves in their conditions, of life. Many a clan is greater than another, many a tribe greater than another, many a city larger than another, and many a town more populous, than another. It has thus become clear that the existence of Bedouins is prior to, and the basis of, the existence of towns and cities. Likewise, the existence of towns and cities results from luxury customs pertaining to luxury and ease, which are posterior to the customs that go with the bare necessities of life. 4. Bedouins are closer to being good than sedentary people. The 16th reason for it is that the soul in its first natural state of creation is ready to accept whatever good or evil may arrive and leave an imprint upon it. Muhammad said, "Every infant is born in the natural state. It is his parents who make him a Jew or a Christian or a Magian." 17. To the degree the soul is first affected by one of the two qualities, it moves away from the other and finds it difficult to acquire it. When customs proper to goodness have been first to enter the soul of a good person and his soul has thus acquired the habit of goodness, that person moves away from evil and finds it difficult to do anything evil. The same applies to the evil person when customs, proper to evil, have been first to affect him. Sedentary people are much concerned with all kinds of pleasures. They are accustomed to luxury and success in worldly occupations and to indulgence in worldly desires. Therefore, their souls are colored with all kinds of blameworthy and evil qualities. The more of them they possess, the more remote do the ways and means of goodness become to them. Eventually they lose all sense of restraint. Many of them are found to use improper language in their gatherings as well as in the presence of their superiors and womenfolk. They are not deterred by any sense of restraint, because the bad custom of behaving openly in an improper manner in both words and deeds has taken hold of them. Bedouins may be as concerned with worldly affairs as sedentary people are. However, such concern would touch only the necessities of life and not luxuries or anything causing, or calling for, desires and pleasures. The customs they follow in their mutual dealings are, therefore, appropriate. As compared with those of sedentary people, their evil ways and blameworthy qualities are much less numerous. They are closer to the first natural state and more remote from the evil habits that have been impressed upon the souls of sedentary people, through numerous and ugly, blameworthy customs. Thus, they can more easily be cured than sedentary people. This is obvious. It will later on 18 become clear that sedentary life constitutes the last stage of civilization and the point where it begins to decay. It also constitutes the last stage of evil and of remoteness from goodness. It has thus become clear that Bedouins are closer to being good than sedentary people. God loves those who fear God. 19. This is not contradicted by the statement of Al-Hajjaj to Salamah b. Al-Aqwa, which is included among the traditions of al-Bukhari. When Al-Hajjaj learned that Salamah was going to live in the desert, he asked him, "You have turned back and become an Arab?" Salamah replied, "No, but the messenger of God permitted me to go back to the desert." 20. It should be known that at the beginning of Islam, the inhabitants of Mecca were enjoined to emigrate, so as to be with the Prophet wherever he might settle, in order to help him and to aid him in his affairs and to guard him. The Arab Bedouins of the desert were not enjoined to emigrate, because the Meccas were possessed of a strong group feeling for the Prophet to aid and guard him, such as did not exist among the desert Arabs. The emigrants, therefore, used to express an aversion to becoming Arabs, that is, to becoming inhabitants of the desert upon whom emigration was not obligatory. According to the tradition of Sa'di b. Abi Waqqas, Muhammad said, when Sa'di was ill in Mecca, "O God, give success to the emigration of my companions and do not cause them to turn back. 21. That means, God should enable them to stay in Medina and not to have to leave it, so that they would not have to discontinue the emigration they had begun, and return. It is the same meaning as is implied in the expression turning back in connection with any enterprise. It is, also, said that the prohibition against turning back was restricted to the time before the conquest of Mecca, when there was a need for emigration because of the small number of Muslims. After the conquest, when the Muslims had become numerous and strong, and God had guaranteed his prophet inviolability, emigration was no longer necessary. Muhammad said, "There is no emigration after the conquest." 22. This has been interpreted as meaning that the injunction to emigrate was no longer valid for those who became Muslims after the conquest. It has also been interpreted to mean that emigration was no longer obligatory upon those who had become Muslims and had emigrated before the conquest. At any rate, all agree that emigration was no longer necessary after the Prophet's death, because the men around Muhammad had by then dispersed and spread in all directions. The only thing that remained was the merit of living in Medina, which constituted emigration. Thus, Al-Hajjaj's statement to Salama, who went to live in the desert, "You have turned back and become an Arab," is a reproach to Salama for giving up his residence in Medina. It contains an allusion to the words of the aforementioned prayer of the Prophet, "Do not cause them to turn back." The words, "You have become an Arab," are a reproach, as they imply that Salama had become one of the Arabs who did not emigrate. In his reply, Salama denied both insinuations. He said that the Prophet had permitted him to go to the desert. This was a special permission in Salama's case, exactly as, for instance, the testimony of Khuzimah 23 and Abu Burda as 24 lam were special to the cases of Khuzimah and Abu Burda. Or, it may be, Al-Hajjaj reproached Salama only because he was giving up his residence in Medina, as he was aware that emigration was no longer necessary after the Prophet's death. Salama's reply was that it was more proper and better to avail himself of the Prophet's permission, who had distinguished him by this special permission only because the Prophet had some motive known to himself when he gave it. In any event, the story does not imply that censure of desert life is meant by the expression "to become an Arab." It is known that the legal obligation to emigrate served the purposes of aiding and guarding the Prophet. It did not have the purpose of censuring desert life. Use of the expression "to become an Arab" to condemn non-fulfillment of the duty of emigration is no indication that becoming an Arab is something blameworthy. And God knows better. 5. Bedouins are more disposed to courage than sedentary people. The 25 reason for this is that sedentary people have become used to laziness and ease. They are sunk in well-being and luxury. They have entrusted defense of their property and their lives to the governor and ruler who rules them, and to the militia which has the task of guarding them. They find full assurance of safety in the walls that surround them, and the fortifications that protect them. No noise disturbs them, and no hunting occupies them. They are carefree and trusting, and have ceased to carry weapons. Successive generations have grown up in this way of life. They have become like women and children, who depend upon the master of the house. Eventually, this has come to be a quality of character that replaces natural disposition. The Bedouins, on the other hand, live separate from the community. They are alone in the country and remote from militias. They have no walls and gates. Therefore, they provide their own defense and do not entrust it to, or rely upon others for it. They always carry weapons. They watch carefully all sides of the road. They take hurried naps only when they are together in company or when they are in the saddle. They pay attention to every faint barking and noise. They go alone into the desert, guided by their fortitude, putting their trust in themselves. Fortitude has become a character quality of theirs, and courage their nature. They use it whenever they are called upon or an alarm stirs them. When sedentary people mix with them in the desert or associate with them on a journey, they depend on them. They cannot do anything for themselves without them. This is an observed fact. Their dependence extends, even to knowledge of the country, the right directions, watering places, and crossroads. The reason for this is the thing we have explained. At the base of it is the fact that man is a child of the customs and the things he has become used to. He is not the product of his natural disposition and temperament. 25 are the conditions to which he has become accustomed, until they have become for him a quality of character, and matters of habit and custom have replaced his natural disposition. If one studies this in human beings, one will find much of it, and it will be found to be a correct observation. God creates whatever he wishes. 26. 6. The reliance of sedentary people upon laws destroys their fortitude and power of resistance. Not everyone is master of his own affairs. Chiefs and leaders who are masters of the affairs of men are few in comparison with the rest. As a rule, man must by necessity be dominated by someone else. If the domination is kind and just and the people under it are not oppressed by its laws and restrictions, they are guided by the courage or cowardice that they possess in themselves. They are satisfied with the absence of any restraining power. Self-reliance eventually becomes a quality natural to them. They would not know anything else. If, however, the domination with its laws is one of brute force and intimidation, it breaks their fortitude and deprives them of their power of resistance as a result of the inertness that develops in the souls of the oppressed, as we shall explain. Yuma forbade Sadi, b. Abi Waqwas, to exercise such arbitrary power, when two Rabbi Hawiya took the spoils of Al-Jalias. The value of the spoils was 75,000 gold pieces. Tura had followed Al-Jalias on the day of Al-Qadisiyah, killed him, and taken his spoils. Sadi took them away from him and said, "Why did you not wait for my permission to follow him?" He wrote to Yuma and asked Yuma for permission to confiscate the spoils. But Yuma replied, "Would you want to proceed against a man like Tura, who already has borne so much of the brunt of battle?" 27. And while there still remains so much of the war for you to finish, would you want to break his strength and morale? Thus, Yuma confirmed Tura in possession of the spoils. 28. When laws are enforced by means of punishment, they completely destroy fortitude, because the use of punishment against someone who cannot defend himself generates in that person a feeling of humiliation that, no doubt, must break his fortitude. When laws are intended to serve the purposes of education and instruction and are applied from childhood on, they have to some degree the same effect, because people then grow up in fear and docility and consequently do not rely on their own fortitude. For this reason, greater fortitude is found among the savage Arab Bedouins than among people who are subject to laws. Furthermore, those who rely on laws and are dominated by them from the very beginning of their education and instruction in the crafts, sciences, and religious matters, are thereby deprived of much of their own fortitude. They can scarcely defend themselves at all against hostile acts. This is the case with students, whose occupation it is to study and to learn from teachers and religious leaders, and who constantly apply themselves to instruction and education in very dignified gatherings. This situation and the fact that it destroys the power of resistance and fortitude must be understood. It is no argument against the statement just made, that the men around Muhammad observed the religious laws, and yet did not experience any diminution of their fortitude, but possessed the greatest possible fortitude. When the Muslims got their religion from the lawgiver, Muhammad, the restraining influence came from themselves, as a result of the encouragement and discouragement he gave 29 them in the Qur'an. It was not a result of technical instruction or scientific education. The laws were the laws and precepts of the religion, which they received orally and which their firmly rooted belief in the truth of the articles of faith caused them to observe. Their fortitude remained unabated, and it was not corroded by education or authority. Yuma said, "Those who are not educated, disciplined, by the religious law are not educated, disciplined, by God." 30. This statement expresses Yuma's desire that everyone should have his restraining influence in himself. It also expresses his certainty that the lawgiver, Muhammad, knew best what is good for mankind. The influence of religion, then, decreased among men, and they came to use restraining laws. The religious law became a branch of learning and a craft to be acquired through instruction and education. People turned to sedentary life and assumed the character trait of submissiveness to law. This led to a decrease in their fortitude. It has thus become clear that governmental and educational laws destroy fortitude, because their restraining influence is something that comes from outside. The religious laws, on the other hand, do not destroy fortitude, because their restraining influence is something inherent. Therefore, governmental and educational laws influence sedentary people, in that they weaken their souls and diminish their stamina, because they have to suffer their authority, both as children and as adults. The Bedouins, on the other hand, are not in the same position, because they live far away from the laws of government, instruction, and education. Therefore, Abu Muhammad b. Abi Izid, 31 in his book on the laws governing teachers and students, Ahkam al-Mu'allimi wal-Muta'allimi, said, "The educator must not strike a boy more than 3 times, in one punishment, as an educational measure." 32. Abi Izid reported this remark on the authority of Judge Shari 33. Certain scholars argued in favor of the procedure mentioned, by referring to the threefold choking mentioned in the tradition concerned with the beginning of Revelation 34. This, however, is a weak argument. The tradition about the choking is not suitable proof, because it has nothing to do with ordinary instruction. God is wise and knowing. 35. 7. Only tribes held together by group feeling can live in the desert. It should be known that God put good and evil into the nature of man. Thus, he said in the Qur'an, "We led him along the 2 paths." 36. He further said, "And inspired the soul, with its wickedness as well as its fear of God." 37. Evil is the quality that is closest to man when he fails to improve his customs and, when, religion is not used as the model to improve him. The great mass of mankind is in that condition, with the exception of those to whom God gives success. Evil 38 qualities in man are injustice and mutual aggression. He who casts his eye upon the property of his brother will lay his hand upon it to take it, unless there is a restraining influence to hold him back. The poet thus said, "Injustice is a human characteristic. If you find a moral man, 39, there is some reason why he is not unjust." Mutual aggression of people in towns and cities is averted by the authorities and the government, which hold back the masses under their control from attacks and aggression upon each other. They are thus prevented by the influence of force and governmental authority from mutual injustice, save such injustice as comes from the ruler himself. Aggression against a city from outside may be averted by walls, in the event of negligence, 40 a surprise attack at night, or inability of the inhabitants to withstand the enemy during the day. Or, it may be averted with the help of a militia of government auxiliary troops, if the inhabitants are otherwise prepared and ready to offer resistance. The 41 restraining influence among Bedouin tribes comes from their sheikhs and leaders. It results from the great respect and veneration they generally enjoy among the people. The hamlets of the Bedouins are defended against outside enemies by a tribal militia composed of noble youths of the tribe who are known for their courage. Their defense and protection are successful only if they are a close-knit group 42 of common descent. This strengthens their stamina and makes them feared, since everybody's affection for his family and his group is more important than anything else. Compassion and affection for one's blood relations and relatives exist in human nature as something God put into the hearts of men. It makes for mutual support and aid, and increases the fear felt by the enemy. This may be exemplified by the story in the Qur'an about Joseph's brothers. They said to their father, "If the wolf eats him, while we are a group, then, indeed, we have lost out." 43 This means that one cannot imagine any hostile act being undertaken against anyone who has his group feeling to support him. Those who have no one of their own lineage to care for, rarely feel affection for their fellows. If danger is in the air on the day of battle, such a one slinks away and seeks to save himself, because he is afraid of being left without support. 44 And dreads that prospect. Such people, therefore, cannot live in the desert, because they would fall prey to any nation that might want to swallow them up. If this is true with regard to the place where one lives, which is in constant need of defense and military protection, it is equally true with regard to every other human activity, such as prophecy, the establishment of royal authority, or propaganda, for a cause. Nothing can be achieved in these matters without fighting for it, since man has the natural urge to offer resistance. And for fighting one cannot do without group feeling, as we mentioned at the beginning. This should be taken as the guiding principle of our later exposition. God gives success. 8. Group feeling results only from blood relation ship or something corresponding to it. Respect for blood 45 ties is something natural among men, with the rarest exceptions. It leads to affection for one's relations and blood relatives, the feeling that no harm ought to befall them nor any destruction come upon them. One feels shame when one's relatives are treated unjustly or attacked, and one wishes to intervene between them and whatever peril or destruction threatens them. This is a natural urge in man, for as long as there have been human beings. If the direct relationship between persons who help each other is very close, so that it leads to close contact and unity, the ties are obvious and clearly require the existence of a feeling of solidarity, without any outside prodding. If, however, the relationship is somewhat distant, it is often forgotten in part. However, some knowledge of it remains, and this causes a person to help his relatives for the known motive, in order to escape the shame he would feel in his soul were a person to whom he is somehow related treated unjustly. 46. Clients and allies belong in the same category. The affection everybody has for his clients and allies results from the feeling of shame that comes to a person when one of his neighbors, relatives, or a blood relation in any degree of kinship is humiliated. The reason for it is that a client-master relationship leads to close contact exactly, or approximately in the same way, as does common descent. It is in that sense that one must understand Muhammad's remark, learn as much of your pedigrees as is necessary to establish your ties of blood relationship. 47. It means that pedigrees are useful only insofar as they imply the close contact that is a consequence of blood ties and that eventually leads to mutual help and affection. Anything beyond that is superfluous. 48. For a pedigree is something imaginary and devoid of reality. 49. Its usefulness consists only in the resulting connection and close contact. If the fact of common descent is obvious and clear, it evokes in man a natural affection, as we have said. If, however, its existence is known only from remote history, it moves the imagination but faintly. Its usefulness is gone, and preoccupation with it becomes gratuitous, a kind of game, and as such is not permissible. In this sense, one must understand the remark, genealogy is something that is of no use to know and that it does no harm not to know. 50. This means that when common descent is no longer clear and has become a matter of scientific knowledge, it can no longer move the imagination and is denied the affection caused by group feeling. It has become useless. And God knows better. 9. Purity of lineage is found only among the savage Arabs of the desert and other such people. This 51 is on account of the poor life, hard conditions, and bad habitats that are peculiar to the Arabs. They are the result of necessity that destined these conditions for the Arabs, inasmuch as their subsistence depends on camels and camel breeding and pasturage. The camels are the cause of the Arabs' savage life in the desert, since they feed on the shrubs of the desert and give birth to their young ones in the desert sands. As has been mentioned before. 52. The desert is a place of hardship and starvation. But to them it has become familiar and accustomed. Generations of Arabs grew up in the desert. Eventually, they become confirmed in their character and natural qualities. No member of any other nation was disposed to share their conditions. No member of any other race felt attracted to them. But if one of them were to find ways and means of fleeing from these conditions, he would not do so or give them up. 53. Therefore, their pedigrees can be trusted not to have been mixed up and corrupted. They have been preserved pure in unbroken lines. This is the case, for instance, with Muda tribes such as the Quraysh, the Qiyah, the Thaqif, the Bawazad, the Hudhail, and their Khuzar neighbors. They lived a hard life in places where there was no agriculture or animal husbandry. They lived far from the fertile fields of Syria and the Iraq, far from the sources of seasonings and grains. How pure have they kept their lineages! These are unmixed in every way, and are known to be unsullied. Other Arabs lived in the hills and at the sources of fertile pastures and plentiful living. Among these Arabs were the Himyar and the Kala, such as the Lakm, the Judham, the Gasa, the Tai, the Kuda'a, and the Ayyad. Their lineages were mixed up, and their groups intermingled. It is known that people, genealogists, differ with respect to each one of these families. This came about as the result of intermixture with non-Arabs. They did not pay any attention to preserving the purity of lineage of their families and groups. This 54 was done only by true Arabs. Yuma said, "Study genealogy, and be not like the Nabateans of the Mesopotamian lowlands." When one of them is asked about his origin, he says, "From such and such a village." 55. Furthermore, the Arabs of the fertile fields were affected by the general human trend toward competition for the fat soil and the good pastures. This resulted in intermingling and much mixture of lineages. Even at the beginning of Islam, people occasionally referred to themselves by their places of residence. They referred to the districts of Qusrai, of Damascus, or of the Urasim, the border region of northern Syria. This custom was then transferred to Spain. It happened not because the Arabs rejected genealogical considerations, but because they acquired particular places of residence after the conquest. They eventually became known by their places of residence. These became a distinguishing mark, in addition to the pedigree, used by the Arabs to identify themselves in the presence of their emirs. Later on, sedentary Arabs mixed with Persians and other non-Arabs. Purity of lineage was completely lost, and its fruit, the group feeling, was lost and rejected. The tribes, then, disappeared and were wiped out, and with them, the group feeling was wiped out. But the earlier situation remained unchanged among the Bedouins. God inherits the earth and whomever is upon it. 10. How lineages become confused. It is clear that a person of a certain descent may become attached to people of another descent, either because he feels well disposed toward them, or because there exists an old alliance or client-master relationship. Or yet because he had to flee from his own people by reason of some crime he committed. Such a person comes to be known as having the same descent as those to whom he has attached himself, and is counted one of them with respect to the things that result from common descent, such as affection, the rights and obligations concerning talio and blood money, and so on. When the things which result from common descent are there, it is as if common descent itself were there, because the only meaning of belonging to one or another group is that one is subject to its laws and conditions, as if one had come into close contact with it. In the course of time, the original descent is almost forgotten. Those who knew about it have passed away, and it is no longer known to most people. Family lines in this manner continually changed from one tribal group to another, and some people developed close contact with others, of a different descent. This happened both in pre-Islamic and in Islamic times, and between both Arabs and non-Arabs. If one studies the different opinions concerning the pedigree of the family of Al-Mahdi 56 and others, the matter will become somewhat clearer. The affair of the Bajillah and Asabiyyah b. Hatham is an other illustration. When Umar appointed Asabiyyah their governor, the Bajillah asked Umar to withdraw him, saying that he was as if 57 among them, that is, one who had come to them from outside and attached himself to them. They asked that he appoint Jari instead. Umar asked Asabiyyah about this, and he replied, "They are right, O Commander of the Faithful. I am from the Azd. I shed blood among my people, and joined the Bajillah." 58. This shows how Asabiyyah had come to mix with the Bajillah, had become of their skin, and was known as one having the same descent as they, to the extent that he could eventually become a candidate for leadership over them. And would have, had someone not remembered the genealogical ramifications. Had they overlooked it and had, still, more time elapsed, his foreign origin would have been forgotten, and he would have been considered one of them in every respect. This should be understood and pondered as one of God's ways with his creatures. Similar things occur frequently in our own times, and have always been frequent in former times. 59. 11. Leadership over people who share in a given group feeling cannot be vested in those not of the same descent. 60. This is because leadership exists only through superiority, and superiority only through group feeling, as we have mentioned before. 61. Leadership over people, therefore, must, of necessity, derive from a group feeling that is superior to each individual group feeling. Each individual group feeling that becomes aware of the superiority of the group feeling of the leader is ready to obey and follow that leader. Now, a person who has become attached to people of a common descent usually does not share the group feeling that derives from their common descent. He is merely attached to them. 62 The firmest connection he has with the group is as client and ally. This in no way guarantees him superiority over them. Assuming that he has developed close contact with them, that he has mixed with them, that the fact that he was originally merely attached to them has been forgotten, and that he has become one of their skin and is addressed as one having the same descent as they, how could he, or one of his forebears, have acquired leadership before that process had taken place, since leadership is transmitted in one particular branch that has been marked for superiority through group feeling? The fact that he was merely attached to the tribe was no doubt known at an earlier stage, and at that time prevented him, or rather, his forebears, from assuming leadership. Thus, it could not have been passed on by a man who was still merely attached to the tribe. Leadership must of necessity be inherited from the person who is entitled to it, in accordance with the fact, which we have stated, that superiority results from group feeling. Many leaders of tribes or groups are eager to acquire certain pedigrees. They desire them because persons of that particular descent possessed some special virtue, such as bravery, or nobility, or fame, however this may have come about. They go after such a family and involve themselves in claims to belong to a branch of it. They do not realize that they thus bring suspicion upon themselves with regard to their leadership and nobility. Such things are frequently found among people at this time. Thus, the Zata in general claim to be Arabs. The Aladrabab, who are known as the Hijazis and who belong to the Boromir, one of the branches of the Tfba, claim that they belong to the Bor Salema and, in particular, to the Sharid, a branch of the Bani Salih. Their ancestor is said to have joined the Boromir as a carpenter who made beers. He mixed with them and developed a close contact with them. Finally, he became their leader. He was called by them Al-Hijazi. Similarly, the Bor Abd al-Qawi Al-Abbas of the Tilji claim to be descendants of Al-Abbas b. Abd al-Muttalib, because they want to have noble descent, from the family of the Prophet, and hold a mistaken opinion concerning the name of Al-Abbas b. Asiya, the father of Abd al-Qawi. It is not known that any Abbasid ever entered the Maghrib. From the beginning of the Abbasid dynasty and thereafter, the Maghrib was under the influence of the Idrisids and the Ubaydid, Fatimids, allied enemies of the Abbasids. No Abbasid would have become attached to a Shia. Similarly, the Zayids, the Abd al-Wadid rulers, of Tlems, claim to be descendants of al-Qasim b. Idris, basing their claim on the fact that their family is known to have descended from al-Qasim. In their own Zaitar dialect, they are called Atit al-Qasim 63, that is, Bo al-Qasim. They claim that the Qasim, after whom they are named, was al-Qasim b. Idris, or al-Qasim b. Muhammad b. Idris. If that were true, all that can be said concerning that Qasim is that he fled his own realm and attached himself to the Zata group of the Abd al-Wad. How, then, could he have gained complete leadership over them in the desert? The story is an error resulting from the name of al-Qasim, which is very frequent among the Idrisids. The Zayids, therefore, thought that their Qasim was an Idrisid. But after all, they hardly need so spurious a genealogy. They gained royal authority and power through their group feeling, not through claims to Alid, Abbasid, or other descent. These things are invented by people to get into the good graces of rulers, through sycophantic behavior and through the opinions they express. Their fabrications eventually become so well known as to be irrefutable. I have heard that Yagam Raisi 64b. Zaya, the founder of the Zayed rule, when he was asked about the alleged Idrisid descent of his family, denied it. He expressed himself in the Zata dialect as follows: "We gained worldly power and royal authority with our swords, not through noble family connections. The usefulness of our royal authority for us, 64 in the next world, depends on God." And he turned away from the person who, in this way, had hoped to get into his good graces. Another example is the claim of the Borsadi, sheikhs of the Boyazid of the Tfba, to be descendants of the Caliph, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Then, there is the claim of the Borsalamamor, sheikhs of the Boyadlalti, Idlelt, of the Titji, that they belong to the Salaim, as well as the claim of the Davida, sheikhs of the Riyah, that they are descendants of the Barmecides. 65 We also hear that the Bormua, emirs of the Tai in the east, claim to be descendants of the Barmecides. There are many such examples. The fact that these groups are the leaders among their peoples speaks against their claims to such pedigrees, as we have mentioned. Their common descent, with their people, must be pure, and they must enjoy the strongest possible group feeling, in their own tribe, to have gained the leadership. Were this taken into consideration, errors in this matter would be avoided. The connection of the Mordai of the Almohads with the Alid family should not be considered a case of this type. The Mordai did not belong to the leading family among his people, the Hagha. He became their leader after he had become famous for his knowledge and religion, and by virtue of the fact that the Mazmuda tribe followed his call. Yet, he belonged to a Hagha family of medium rank. 66 God knows the unseen and the visible. 12. Only those who share in the group feeling of a group can have a house and nobility in the basic sense and in reality, while others have it only in a metaphorical and figurative sense. This is because nobility and prestige are the result of personal qualities. A house. 67 means that a man counts noble and famous men among his forebears. The fact that he is their progeny and descendant gives him great standing among his fellows, for his fellows respect the great standing and nobility that his ancestors acquired through their personal qualities. With regard to their growth and propagation, human beings can be compared to minerals. Muhammad said, "Men are minerals." The best ones in pre-Islamic times are also the best ones in Islam, if they are understanding. 68 Prestige in its proper meaning refers to family, descent. We have explained that the advantage of common descent consists in the group feeling that derives from it and that leads to affection and mutual help. Wherever the group feeling is truly formidable and its soil kept pure, the advantage of a common descent is more evident than elsewhere, and the group feeling is more effective. It is an additional advantage to have a number of noble ancestors. Thus, prestige and nobility become firmly grounded in those who share in the group feeling of a tribe, because there exists, in them, the result of common descent. The nobility of a house is in direct proportion to the different degrees of group feeling, because nobility is the secret of group feeling. Isolated 69 inhabitants of cities can have a house only in a metaphorical sense. The assumption that they possess one is a specious claim. Seen in its proper light, prestige means to the inhabitants of cities that some of them count among their forefathers men who had good, personal, qualities and who mingled with good people, and that, in addition, they try to be as decent as possible. This is different from the real meaning of group feeling, as group feeling derives from common descent and a number of forefathers. The terms prestige and house are used metaphorically in this connection, because there exists in this case a number of successive ancestors who consistently performed good deeds. This is not true and unqualified prestige. 70. A house possesses an original nobility through group feeling and personal qualities. Later on, the people who have a house divest themselves of that nobility when group feeling disappears as the result of sedentary life, as mentioned before. 71. And they mingle with the common people. A certain delusion as to their former prestige remains in their souls and leads them to consider themselves members of the most noble houses. 72. They are, however, far from that status, because their group feeling has completely disappeared. Many inhabitants of cities who had their origins in noble, Arab or non-Arab houses share such delusions. The Israelites are the most firmly misled in this delusion. They originally had one of the greatest houses in the world, first, because of the great number of prophets and messengers born among their ancestors, extending from Abraham to Moses, the founder of their religious group and law, and next, because of their group feeling and the royal authority that God had promised and granted them by means of that group feeling. Then, they were divested of all that, and they suffered humiliation and indigence. They were destined to live as exiles on earth. For thousands of years, they knew only enslavement and unbelief. 73. Still, the delusion of nobility has not left them. They can be found saying, "He is an Aaronite, he is a descendant of Joshua, he is one of Caleb's progeny, he is from the tribe of Judah." This in spite of the fact that their group feeling has disappeared and that for many long years they have been exposed to humiliation. 74. Many other inhabitants of cities who hold noble pedigrees but no longer share in any group feeling, are inclined to utter similar nonsense. Abul Walid B. Rushed, Averroes, erred in this respect. He mentioned prestige in the Rhetoric, one of the abridgments of the books of the first science. 75. Prestige, he states, belongs to people who are ancient settlers in a town. He did not consider the things we have just mentioned. I should like to know how long residence in a town can help anyone to gain prestige, if he does not belong to a group that makes him feared and causes others to obey him. Averroes, in a way, considers prestige as depending exclusively on the number of forefathers. Yet, 76. Rhetoric means to sway the opinions of those whose opinions count, that is, the men in command. It takes no notice of those who have no power. They cannot sway anyone's opinions, and their own opinions are not sought. The sedentary inhabitants of cities fall into that category. It is true that Averroes grew up in a generation, group, and a place where people had no experience of group feeling and were not familiar with the conditions governing it. Therefore, Averroes did not progress beyond his well-known definition of house and prestige as something depending merely on the number of one's ancestors, and did not refer to the reality of group feeling and its influence among men. God knows everything. 77. 13. House and nobility come to clients and followers only through their masters and not through their own descent. This is because, as we have mentioned before, only those who share in a group feeling have basic and true nobility. When such people take people of another descent as followers, or when they take slaves 78 and clients into servitude, and enter into close contact with them, as we have said, the clients and followers share in the group feeling of their masters and take it on as if it were their own group feeling. By taking their special place within the group feeling, they participate to some extent in the common descent to which that particular group feeling belongs. Muhammad thus said, "The client of people belongs to them, whether he is their client as a slave, or as a follower and ally." 79. His own descent and birth are of no help as regards the group feeling of the master, since that group feeling has nothing to do with his own descent. The group feeling that belonged to his own family is lost, because its influence disappeared when he entered into close contact with that other family and lost contact with the men whose group feeling he had formerly shared. He thus becomes one of the others and takes his place among them. In the event a number of his ancestors also shared the group feeling of these people, he comes to enjoy among these other people a certain nobility and house, in keeping with his position as their client and follower. However, he does not come to be as noble as they are, but remains inferior to them. This is the case with clients of dynasties and with all servants. They acquire nobility by being firmly rooted in their client relationship, and by their service to their particular dynasty, and by having a large number of ancestors who had been under the protection of that dynasty. One knows that the Turkish clients of the Abbasids and, before them, the Barmecides, as well as the Baynabakht, thus achieved house and nobility and created glory and importance for themselves by being firmly rooted in their relationship to the Abbasid dynasty. Jafar b. Yahya b. Khalid had the greatest possible house and nobility. This was the result of his position as a client of al-Rashid and his family. It was not the result of his own noble descent among the Persians. The same is the case with clients and servants under any dynasty. They have house and prestige by being firmly rooted in their client relationship with a particular dynasty and by being its faithful followers. Their original descent disappears, and means nothing, if it is not that of the dynasty. It remains undercover and is not considered in connection with their importance and glory. The thing that is considered is their position as clients and followers, because this accords with the secret of group feeling which, alone, produces house and nobility. The nobility of a client is, in a way, derived from the nobility of his masters, and his house is derived from what his masters have built. His own descent and birth do not help him. His glory is built upon his relationship as client to a particular dynasty, and upon his close contact with it as a follower and product of its education. His own original descent may have implied close contact with some group feeling and dynasty. If that close contact is gone and the person in question has become a client and follower of another dynasty, his original descent is no longer of any use to him, because its group feeling has disappeared. The new relationship becomes useful to him, because its group feeling exists. This applies to the Barmecides. It has been reported that they belonged to a Persian house, the members of which had been guardians of the fire temples of the Persians. When they became clients of the Abbasids, their original descent was not considered. Their nobility resulted from their position as clients and followers of the Abbasid dynasty. Everything else is unsupported and unrealistic delusions prompted by undisciplined souls. The facts of existence confirm our remarks. Most noble among you in God's eyes is he who fears God most. 81. 14. Prestige lasts at best 4 generations in one lineage. 82. It should be known that the world of the elements and all it contains comes into being and decays. This applies to both its essences and its conditions. Minerals, plants, all the animals including man, and the other created things come into being and decay, as one can see with one's own eyes. The same applies to the conditions that affect created things, and especially the conditions that affect man. Sciences grow up and then are wiped out. The same applies to crafts, and to similar things. Prestige is an accident that affects human beings. It comes into being and decays inevitably. No human being exists who possesses an unbroken pedigree of nobility from Adam down to himself. The only exception was made for the Prophet, as a special act of divine grace to him, and as a measure designed to safeguard his true character. Nobility originates in the state of being outside, as has been said 83, that is, being outside of 84 leadership and nobility and being in a vile, humble station, devoid of prestige. This means that all nobility and prestige is preceded by the non-existence of nobility and prestige, as is the case with every created thing. It reaches its end in a single family within 4 successive generations. This is as follows: the builder of the glory of the family knows what it cost him to do the work, and he keeps the qualities that created his glory and made it last. The son who comes after him had personal contact with his father and thus learned those things from him. However, he is inferior in this respect to his father, inasmuch as a person who learns things through study is inferior to a person who knows them from practical application. The third generation must be content with imitation and, in particular, with reliance upon tradition. This member is inferior to him of the second generation, inasmuch as a person who relies, blindly, upon tradition is inferior to a person who exercises independent judgment. 85. The fourth generation, then, is inferior to the preceding ones in every respect. This member has lost the qualities that preserved the edifice of their glory. He, actually, despises those qualities. He imagines that the edifice was not built through application and effort. He thinks that it was something due his people from the very beginning by virtue of the mere fact of their noble descent, and not something that resulted from group, effort, and individual qualities. For he sees the great respect in which he is held by the people, but he does not know how that respect originated and what the reason for it was. He imagines that it is due to his descent and nothing else. He keeps away from those in whose group feeling he shares, thinking that he is better than they. He trusts that they will obey him because he was brought up to take their obedience for granted, and he does not know the qualities that made obedience necessary. Such qualities are humility, in dealing with such men, and respect for their feelings. Therefore, he considers them despicable, and they, in turn, revolt against him and despise him. They transfer political leadership from him and his direct lineage to some other related branch of his tribe, in obedience to their group feeling, as we have stated. They do so after they have convinced themselves that the qualities of the new leader are satisfactory to them. His family then grows, whereas the family of the original leader decays and the edifice of his house collapses. This is the case with rulers who have royal authority. It also is the case with all the houses of tribes, of emirs, and of everybody else who shares in a group feeling, and then also with the houses among the urban population. When one house goes down, another one rises in another group of the same descent. If he wants them to disappear, he causes them to do so, and brings forth a new creation. This is not difficult for God. 86. The rule of 4 generations, with respect to prestige, usually holds true. It may happen that a house is wiped out, disappears, and collapses in fewer than 4 generations, or it may continue unto the 5th and 6th generations, though in a state of decline and decay. The 4 generations can be explained as the builder, the one who has personal contact with the builder, the one who relies on tradition, and the destroyer. There could not be fewer. The fact that prestige lasts 4 generations is considered, in statements discussed, under the subject of praise and glorification. Muhammad said, "The noble son of the noble, father of the noble, grandfather of the noble, great-grandfather, Joseph, the son of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham. 87. This indicates that Joseph had reached the limit in glory. In the Torah, there is the following passage: God, your Lord, is powerful 88 and jealous, visiting the sins of the fathers upon the children unto the third and the fourth generations. This shows that 4 generations in one lineage are the limit in extent of ancestral prestige. The Kitab al-Agay 89 reports, in the story of Uwais al-Quwafi, that Khosrow asked an new man whether there was among the Arabs a tribe that was nobler than other tribes. And when the answer was yes, he asked, in what respect does such great nobility show itself? A new man replied, in cases of men, with 3 successive ancestors who were leaders, and where the 4th generation, then, was perfect. The house thus belongs to his tribe. 90. He looked for such people and found that the only ones that fulfilled the condition were the family of Hudhayfa b. Badres al-Fazari, the house of Qais, the family of Hajib b. Turara, the house of Tamim, the family of Duwanjade, the house of Sheba, and the family of al-Ashath b. Qais. Of the Kedah 91. He assembled those clans and the families attached to them, and appointed impartial judges. Hudhayfa b. Badres stood up, then al-Ashath b. Qais, because of his relationship to a new man, then Bistam b. Qais of the Sheba, then Flajab b. Turara, and then Qais b. Asim. They made long speeches. Khosrow, finally, said, each one of them is a chieftain who occupies his proper place. Those houses were the ones that enjoyed the greatest reputation among the Arabs after the Hashemites. To them belonged also the house of the Bor Adiyah, 92 of the Bor 1 Harith b. Kab, the house of the Yemen. All this shows that prestige lasts at best 4 generations. And God knows better. 15. Savage nations are better able to achieve superiority than others. It should be known that since, as we have stated in the 3rd prefatory discussion, 93 desert life no doubt is the reason for bravery, savage groups are braver than others. They are, therefore, better able to achieve superiority and to take away the things that are in the hands of other nations. The situation of one and the same group changes, in this respect, with the change of time. Whenever people settle in the fertile plains and amass 94 luxuries and become accustomed to a life of abundance and luxury, their bravery decreases to the degree that their wildness and desert habits decrease. This is exemplified by dumb animals, such as gazelles, wild buffaloes, cows, and donkeys, that are domesticated. When they cease to be wild as the result of contact with human beings, and when they have a life of abundance, their vigor and violence undergo change. This affects even their movements and the beauty of their coat. 95. The same applies to savage human beings who become sociable and friendly. The reason is that familiar customs determine human nature and character. Superiority comes to nations through enterprise and courage. The more firmly rooted in desert habits and the wilder a group is, the closer does it come to achieving superiority over others, if both parties are otherwise approximately equal in number, strength, and group feeling. In this connection, one may compare the Muda with the Ijimya and the Kala before them, who preceded them in royal authority and in the life of luxury, and also with the Rabi'ah who settled in the fertile fields of the Iraq. The Muda retained their desert habits, and the others embarked upon a life of abundance and great luxury before they did. Desert life prepared the Muda most effectively for achieving superiority. They took away and appropriated what the other groups had in their hands. The same was the case also with the Bortai, the Boromir b. Sasa, and the Borsalem B. Massa 96 later on. They remained longer in the desert than the other Muda and Yemit tribes, and did not have any of their wealth. The desert habits thus preserved the power of their group feeling, and the habits of luxury did not wear it out. They thus eventually became the most powerful group among the Arabs. Thus, wherever an Arab tribe leads a life of luxury and abundance, while another does not, the one holding fast to desert life the longer will be superior to and more powerful than the other, if both parties are, otherwise, equal in strength and number. This is how God proceeds with his creatures. 16. The goal to which group feeling leads is royal authority. This 97 is because, as we have mentioned before, 98 group feeling gives protection and makes possible mutual defense, the pressing of claims, 99 and every other kind of social activity. We have also mentioned before 100 that according to their nature, human beings need someone to act as a restraining influence and mediator in every social organization, in order to keep the members from fighting with each other. That person must, by necessity, have superiority over the others in the matter of group feeling. If not, his power to exercise a restraining influence could not materialize. Such superiority is royal authority, mulk. It is more than leadership. Leadership means being a chieftain, and the leader is obeyed, but he has no power to force others to accept his rulings. Royal authority means superiority and the power to rule by force. When a person sharing in the group feeling 101 has reached the rank of chieftain and commands obedience, and when he then finds the way open toward superiority and the use of force, he follows that way, because it is something desirable. He cannot completely achieve his goal, except with the help of the group feeling, which causes the others to obey him. Thus, royal superiority is a goal to which group feeling leads, as one can see. Even if an individual tribe has different houses and many diverse group feelings, still, there must exist a group feeling that is stronger than all the other group feelings combined, that is superior to them all and makes them subservient, and in which all the diverse group feelings coalesce, as it were, to become one greater group feeling. Otherwise, splits would occur and lead to dissension and strife. If God did not keep human beings apart, the earth would perish. 102. Once group feeling has established superiority over the people who share in that particular group feeling, it will, by its very nature, seek superiority over people of other group feelings unrelated to the first. If the one group feeling is the equal of the other or is able to stave off its challenge, the competing people are even with and equal to each other. In this case, each group feeling maintains its sway over its own domain and people, as is the case with tribes and nations all over the earth. However, if the one group feeling overpowers the other and makes it subservient to itself, the two group feelings enter into close contact, and the defeated group feeling gives added power to the victorious group feeling, which, as a result, sets its goal of superiority and domination higher than before. In this way, it goes on until the power of that particular group feeling equals the power of the ruling dynasty. Then, when the ruling dynasty grows senile and no defender arises from among its friends who share in its group feeling, the new group feeling takes over and deprives the ruling dynasty of its power, and, thus, obtains complete royal authority. The power of a given group feeling may also reach its peak when the ruling dynasty has not yet reached senility. This stage may coincide with the stage at which the ruling dynasty needs to have recourse to the people who represent the various group feelings, in order to master the situation. In such a case, the ruling dynasty incorporates the people who enjoy the powerful group feeling among its clients whom it uses for the execution of its various projects. This, then, means the formation of another royal authority, inferior to that of the controlling royal authority. This was the case with the Turks under the Abbasids, 103 with the Sahaja and the Zata in their relation to the Kutamur, and with the Hamdanids in their relation to the Fatimid, Alids and the Abbasids. It is thus evident that royal authority is the goal of group feeling. When group feeling attains that goal, the tribe, representing that particular group feeling, obtains royal authority, either by seizing actual control or by giving assistance to the ruling dynasty. It depends on the circumstances prevailing at a given time, which of the two alternatives applies. If the group feeling encounters obstacles on its way to the goal, as we shall explain, it stops where it is, until God decides what is going to happen to it. 17. Obstacles on the way toward royal authority are luxury and the submergence of the tribe in a life of prosperity. The reason for this is that, when a tribe has achieved a certain measure of superiority with the help of its group feeling, it gains control over a corresponding amount of wealth and comes to share prosperity and abundance with those who have been in possession of these things for a long time. It shares in them to the degree of its power and usefulness to the ruling dynasty. If the ruling dynasty is so strong that no one would think of depriving it of its power or sharing its power with it, the tribe in question submits to its rule and is satisfied with whatever share in the dynasty's wealth and tax revenue it is permitted to enjoy. Hopes would not go so high as to think of the royal prerogatives or ways to obtain the royal authority. Members of the tribe are merely concerned with prosperity, gain, and a life of abundance. They are satisfied to lead an easy, restful life in the shadow of the ruling dynasty, and to adopt royal habits in building and dress, a matter they stress and in which they take more and more pride, the more luxuries and plenty they obtain, as well as all the other things that go with luxury and plenty. As a result, the toughness of desert life is lost. Group feeling and courage weaken. Members of the tribe revel in the well-being that God has given them. Their children and offspring grow up too proud to look after themselves or to attend to their own needs. They have disdain also for all the other things that are necessary in connection with group feeling. This finally becomes a character trait and natural characteristic of theirs. Their group feeling and courage decrease in the next generations. Eventually, group feeling is altogether destroyed. They thus invite their own destruction. The greater their luxury and the easier the life they enjoy, the closer they are to extinction, not to mention their lost chance of obtaining royal authority. The things that go with luxury and submergence in a life of ease break the vigor of the group feeling, which alone produces superiority. When group feeling is destroyed, the tribe is no longer able to defend or protect itself, let alone press any claims. It will be swallowed up by other nations. It has thus become clear that luxury is an obstacle on the way toward royal authority. God gives his kingdom, royal authority, to whomever he wants to give it. 104. 18. Meekness and docility to outsiders that may come to be found in a tribe are obstacles on the way toward royal authority. The 105 reason for this is that meekness and docility break the vigor and strength of group feeling. The very fact that people are meek and docile shows that their group feeling is lost. They do not become fond of meekness until they are 256 too weak to defend themselves. Those who are too weak to defend themselves are all the more weak when it comes to withstanding their enemies and pressing their claims. The Israelites are a good example. Moses urged them to go and become rulers of Syria. He informed them that God had made this their destiny. But the Israelites were too weak for that. They said, "There are giants in that country, and we shall not enter it until the giants have departed." 106 That is, until God has driven them out by manifesting His power, without the application of our group feeling, and that will be one of your miracles, O Moses. And when Moses urged them on, they persisted and became rebellious, and said, "Go you yourself and your Lord, and fight." 107. The reason for their attitude was that they had become used to being too weak to offer opposition and to press claims. 108. That is the meaning required by the verse, and it must be interpreted in that manner. This situation was the result of the quality of docility and the longing to be subservient to the Egyptians, which the Israelites had acquired through many long years and which led eventually to the complete loss of their group feeling. In addition, they did not really believe what Moses told them, namely, that Syria would be theirs and that the Amalekites who were in Jericho would fall prey to them, by virtue of the divine decree that God had made in favor of the Israelites. They were unable to do what they were asked to do, and felt too weak to do it. They realized that they were too weak to press any claims, because they had acquired the quality of meekness. They suspected the story their prophet told them and the command he gave them. For that, God punished them by obliging them to remain in the desert. They stayed in the desert between Syria and Egypt for 40 years. They had no contact with civilization nor did they settle in any city. 109 As it is told in the Qur'an 110 This was because of the harshness the Amalekites in Syria and the Copts in Egypt had practiced against them. Thus, they thought themselves too weak to oppose them. From the context and meaning of the verse, it is evident that the verse intends to refer to the implication of such a sojourn in the desert, namely, the disappearance of the generation whose character had been formed and whose group feeling had been destroyed by the humiliation, oppression, and force from which it had just escaped, and the eventual appearance in the desert of another powerful generation that knew neither laws nor oppression and did not have the stigma of meekness. Thus, a new group feeling could grow up in the new generation, and that new group feeling enabled them to press their claims and to achieve superiority. This makes it evident that 40 years is the shortest period in which one generation can disappear and a new generation can arise. Praised be the wise, the knowing one. This shows most clearly what group feeling means. Group feeling produces the ability to defend oneself, to offer opposition, to protect oneself, and to press one's claims. Whoever loses his group feeling is too weak to do any of these things. The subject of imposts and taxes belongs in this discussion of the things that force meekness upon a tribe. A tribe paying imposts did not do that until it became resigned to meek submission with respect to paying them. Imposts and taxes are a sign of oppression and meekness which proud souls do not tolerate, unless they consider the payment of imposts and taxes easier than being killed and destroyed. In such a case, the group feeling of a tribe is too weak for its own defense and protection. People whose group feeling cannot defend them against oppression certainly cannot offer any opposition or press any claims. They have submitted to humble meekness, and, as we have mentioned before, meekness is an obstacle. An illustration of this fact is Muhammad's statement in the Sahih 111 on the subject of plowing. When he saw a plowshare in one of the houses of the Asa, in Medina, he said, such a thing never entered anyone's house save accompanied by humbleness. This is sound proof for the contention that payment of imposts makes humbleness necessary. In addition, the humbleness that is the result of paying imposts is accompanied by character qualities of cunning and deceit, because force rules, under such circumstances. According to the Sahih 112, the Messenger of God used to decry the payment of imposts. When he was asked about it, he said, "A man who has to pay imposts talks and lies. He promises, and breaks his promise." When one sees a tribe humiliated by the payment of imposts, one cannot hope that it will ever achieve royal authority. This makes clear that it is erroneous to assume that the Za'ata in the Maghrib were sheep-breeding Bedouins who paid imposts to the various rulers of their time. As one can see, this is a serious error. Had such been the case, the Za'ata would never have achieved royal authority and established a dynasty. In this connection, one may compare the words of Shahbaraz, the ruler of Dabed 113 Abdurrahman b. Rabi'ah came upon him, and Shahbaraz asked him for his protection with the promise that he would belong to him. On that occasion, Shahbaraz said, "Today, I am one of you. My hand is in your hands. I am your sincere friend. You are welcome. God bless us and you. The poll tax we shall pay you will consist in our helping you and doing what you will. But do not humiliate us by imposing the poll tax. Otherwise, you would weaken us to the point of becoming the prey of your enemies." 114. This story sufficiently supports our preceding remarks. 19. A sign of the qualification of an individual for royal authority is his eager desire to acquire praiseworthy qualities, and vice versa. Royal authority is something natural to human beings, because of its social implications, as we have stated 115. In view of his natural disposition and his power of logical reasoning, man is more inclined toward good qualities than toward bad qualities. Because the evil in him is the result of the animal powers in him, and inasmuch as he is a human being, he is more inclined toward goodness and good qualities. Now, royal and political authority come to man qua man, because it is something peculiar to man and is not found among animals. Thus, the good qualities in man are appropriate to political and royal authority, since goodness is appropriate to political authority. We have already mentioned 116 that glory has a basis upon which it is built and through which it achieves its reality. That basis is group feeling and the tribal group, to which an individual belongs. Glory also depends upon a detail that completes and perfects its existence. That detail is an individual's personal qualities. Royal authority is a goal of group feeling. Thus, it is likewise a goal of the perfecting details, namely, the personal qualities. The existence of royal authority, without the simultaneous existence of the perfecting details, would be like the existence of a person with his limbs cut off, or it would be like appearing naked before people. The existence of group feeling without the practice of praiseworthy qualities would be a defect among people who possess a house and prestige. All the more so would it be a defect in men who are invested with royal authority, the greatest possible kind of glory and prestige. Furthermore, political and royal authority are God's guarantee to mankind and serve as a representation of God among men with respect to his laws. Now, divine laws affecting men are all for their good and envisage the interests of men. This is attested by the religious law. Bad laws, 117 on the other hand, all result from stupidity and from Satan, in opposition to the predestination and power of God. He makes both good and evil and predetermines them, for there is no maker except him. He who thus obtained group feeling guaranteeing power, and who is known to have good qualities appropriate for the execution of God's laws concerning his creatures, is ready to act as God's substitute and guarantor among mankind. He has the qualifications for that. This proof is more reliable and solid than the first one. It has thus become clear that good qualities attest the potential existence of royal authority in a person who, in addition to his good qualities, possesses group feeling. Whenever we observe people who possess group feeling and who have gained control over many lands and nations, we find in them an eager desire for goodness and good qualities, such as generosity, the forgiveness of error, tolerance toward the weak, hospitality toward guests, the support of dependents, maintenance of the indigent, patience in adverse circumstances, faithful fulfillment of obligations, liberality with money for the preservation of honor, respect for the religious law and for the scholars who are learned in it, observation of the things to be done or not to be done that those scholars prescribe for them, thinking highly of religious scholars, belief in and veneration for men of religion and a desire to receive their prayers, great respect for old men and teachers, acceptance of the truth in response to those who call to it, fairness to and care for those who are too weak to take care of themselves, humility toward the poor, attentiveness to the complaints of supplicants, fulfillment of the duties of the religious law and divine worship in all details, avoidance of fraud, cunning, deceit, and of not fulfilling obligations, and similar things. Thus, we know that these are the qualities of leadership, which persons qualified for royal authority have obtained and which have made them deserving of being the leaders of the people under their control, or to be leaders in general. It is something good that God has given them, corresponding to their group feeling and superiority. It is not something superfluous to them, or something that exists as a joke 118 in connection with them. Royal authority is the good and the rank that most closely correspond to the group feeling they have. We thus know that God granted them royal authority and gave it to them. Vice versa, when God wants a nation to be deprived of royal authority, he causes its members to commit blameworthy deeds and to practice all sorts of vices. This will lead to complete loss of the political virtues among them. These virtues continue to be destroyed until they will no longer exercise royal authority. Someone else will exercise it in their stead. This is to constitute, in addition, an insult to them, in that the royal authority God has given them and the good things he has placed at their disposal are taken away from them. When we want to destroy a village, we order those of its inhabitants who live in luxury to act wickedly therein. Thus, the word becomes true for it, and we do destroy it. 119. Upon close investigation, many instances of what we have said and outlined will be found among the nations of the past. God creates whatever he wishes, and his is the choice. 120. It should be known that a quality belonging to perfection, that tribes possessing group feeling are eager to cultivate and which attests to their right to royal authority, is respect for religious scholars, pious men, noble relatives of the prophet, well-born persons, and the different kinds of merchants and foreigners, as well as the ability to assign everybody to his proper station. The respect shown by tribes and persons, in control of group feelings and families, for men of comparable nobility, tribal position, group feeling, and rank, is something natural. It mostly results from the human desire for rank, or from fear of the people of the person to whom respect is paid, or from a wish for reciprocal treatment. However, in the case of people who have no group feeling to make themselves feared, and who have no rank to bestow, for which one might hope, there can be no doubt as to why they are respected, and it is quite clear what one wants to find through them, namely, glory, perfection in personal qualities, and total progress toward a position of political leadership. Respect for one's rivals and equals must exist in connection with the special 121 political leadership that concerns one's tribe and its competitors and equals. Respect for excellent and particularly qualified strangers means perfection in general political leadership. The pious are thus respected for their religion, scholars, because they are needed for establishing the statutes of the religious law, merchants, in order to give encouragement to their profession, so that their usefulness may be as widespread as possible. Strangers are respected out of generosity and in order to encourage them to undertake certain kinds of activity. Assigning everybody to his proper station is done out of fairness, and fairness means justice. When people who possess group feeling have that, one knows that they are ready for general political leadership, which means they are ready for royal authority. God permits political leadership to exist among them, because the characteristic sign of political leadership exists among them. Therefore, the first thing to disappear in a tribe that exercises royal authority, when God wants to deprive the members of that tribe of their royal and governmental authority, is respect for these kinds of people. When a nation is observed to have lost that respect, it should be realized that all the virtues have begun to go, and it can be expected that the royal authority will cease to exist in it. If God wants evil to happen to certain people, nothing can turn it back. 122. 20. While a nation is savage, its royal authority extends farther. This is because, as we have said, 123 such a nation is better able to achieve superiority and full control, and to subdue other groups. The members of such a nation have the strength to fight other nations, and they are among human beings what beasts of prey are among dumb animals. The Arabs and the Zata and similar groups, for instance, are such nations, as are the Kurds, the Turkomans, and the veiled Sahaja. These savage peoples, furthermore, have no homelands that they might use as a fertile pasture, and no fixed place to which they might repair. All regions and places are the same to them. Therefore, they do not restrict themselves to possession of their own and neighboring regions. They do not stop at the borders of their horizon. They swarm across distant zones and achieve superiority over faraway nations. One might compare in this connection what Umar is reported to have said when he received the oath of allegiance and arose to incite the people to the conquest of the Iraq. He said, "The Hijaz is your home only in as far as it is a pasturage. Those who dwell there have no power over it except in this respect. Where do you, newcomers who emigrated to Medina, stand with regard to God's promise, travel about in the world?" 124 God promised it to you in his book for your inheritance, when he said, in order to give the true religion victory over all religions, even if the polytheists dislike it. 125. Another example is the condition of the ancient, pre-Islamic Arabs, such as the Tubas and the Himyar. They are reported 126 to have marched from the Yemen to the Maghrib at one time, and to the Iraq and India at another time. No other nation except the Arabs ever did anything like that. The condition of the veiled Sahaja in the Maghrib is another example. When they aspired to royal authority, they swarmed out of their desert plains in the neighborhood of the Sudan, in the first zone, and overran the Spanish realm in the fourth and fifth zones, without any intermediate stage. Such is the case with savage nations. Their dynasties therefore, extend over a wider area and over regions farther from their original center than do other nations. God determines night and day. 127.